You're in charge. You're the leader. You make the decision. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks.
I mean, I think that is awful advice.
Yeah.
You get a free brain for every pair of hands you hire.
Yeah.
But the leader has to tap into those brains. We also know from the data that well over 90% of the time, teams outperform individuals.
Yeah.
And in those cases when they don't, it's because
I've always believed that a wise decision is the best decision, but sometimes you get bad advice. That's what we're talking about today on the Lead Everyday Show. I'm Randy Gravitt.
And I'm Mark Miller.
And Mark, sometimes we do get we get bad advice, and the question today from our listener is, what do you do when you get bad advice? Well, what's the worst? But basically, the way they phrased it, what's the worst leadership advice you've ever heard?
Yeah.
And I think I have. To me, this is my answer. I don't know if you have one, but here's what somebody told me one time: you're in charge. You're the leader. You make the decision. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. And I'm like, when you're young and you're a leader and you hear that, you're going, okay, well, I'll just do it. But that's not good advice.
Yeah,
I don't think
that's awful. Why don't we unpack that? Well, let me say,
bad, so.
Let me say, I'm glad you had an answer. I mean, I had one to this question, but I've sort of made the habit of not listening to bad advice.
That to me is the thing.
The best I can discern.
And I'm not sure why they're asking this question, but if I'm getting
let's
bad advice,
go with yours, because I've
yeah.
heard similar things, and there are leaders out there who still would be attempting to live out that bad
just power
advice.
up,
just power up and do it.
Yeah,
I would say there are times when the leader needs to make the decision.
Yeah,
but I don't think that's nearly as often as many leaders want to believe.
Yeah,
that when there are decisions to be made, you've actually got options.
Yep, that's right.
And we may have talked about this on an episode 50 or 75 episodes back, but one is that you can make a command decision. And the leader has that right, authority, and privilege, and our responsibility under authority is to ask good clarifying questions and to execute, right? If it's not immoral, illegal, or unethical, then we do it. It's the leader's call.
You do, yeah.
But there's another option, which is the consultative option, where the leader gets input, but still retains decision rights. And I admire that when a leader says, hey, I'm going to make this decision, but I need your best thinking to inform my decision. A third one we talk about often is a consensus approach, which in my experience, you don't need to use it as often as some do. It's almost, it's bifurcated. You've got many situations where leaders want to make all the decisions, and then I've been involved with other organizations where they want everything to be consensus.
Yeah.
Well, I think both of those are the wrong answers.
Yeah.
And the reason you don't want consensus on everything is it's so time-consuming, and it's so hard to reach a true consensus, because we have historically defined that as a decision that everyone can fully support.
Yeah.
It's not a vote. It's like, yeah, I can support this decision if it's framed like this, if it looks like this.
Yeah.
Those decisions are hard to make. And then one more option we talk about often is a delegated decision. A leader can give someone else the authority to make the decision. Oh, by the way, then that person has the options we just reviewed at their disposal.
Yeah.
But one size does not fit all for decision making.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that to me, and there's lots of ways to think about it, not just decisions, but the way we structure our work and our this command and control, which was the spirit behind the advice I got, was just like, it's almost a dictator mindset. And I don't think that really works. I always believe, and I go back to your decisions, I always believe that weigh-in from your team typically leads to buy-in. Even if I'm making the decision, to know what the people around me are thinking, typically will lead to them leaning in a little more than if I'm just not even listening to them.
Yeah.
And so maybe a part of the advice was do it this way. I would push back and say, you can be a better leader if you listen.
Yeah. And let me say this about command and control, and this is stuff that some of our audience already knows. There are a few advantages one is speed.
Right.
You can make those decisions more quickly.
That's right.
But a downside.
If there's a crisis, I'll give you an
Sure,
example. If
a
there's
crisis,
a crisis
just-
going on, you know, the
a-
building's on fire, we
leader
get out.
leader makes a decision.
The leader's like,
Right.
here's the exit, let's go follow that.
A couple of downsides is you really can only do that well with a span of control about 1 to 7. And people say, well, is that scientifically derived? Well, there is some research to indicate that, but pragmatically, the Chinese pioneered that form of leadership over 5,000 years ago in a military model. And what they discovered is you get more than 7 direct reports, and it's really hard
Yeah.
to command and control effectively.
Yeah.
So there is a span
I would
challenge.
even say it's hard to lead.
Sure.
However you choose
But
to
when
lead.
you're making all the decisions,
No, that's right.
It's,
I
really,
had
really
a,
hard.
I had a quick story. Basically comment here. I had a leader that we were coaching who called, and he was really having a hard time with capacity, which will go to a little bit of what you're talking about. And I'm like, well, how many people do you have reporting? And he had 24 direct reports. And
You solved his capacity problem.
We solved
At
his
least you
capacity
identified
problem. we did, and we solved it actually. He was like, I know that's too many, and I said, yeah, let's see if we can get it to 4. I mean, it's if you're making lots of decisions, whether
Right.
you're making them you're the only one making them or not. But if you're involved in decisions and you're courtesy copied on every email for 24 people, I mean, it's
Right.
like
Right.
that feels exhausting.
Yeah, it is. It is. So 2 more things I'll say about that. One is if you're trying to command and control all of these things, people check their brains at the door.
They
They-
know you're going to do it anyway.
They will ultimately
Yeah.
wait to be told.
Yeah.
And we've said before that you get a free brain for every pair of hands you hire.
Mm. Yeah.
But the leader has to tap into
Yeah.
those brains. And that's the last downside is you lose all of the synergy because in most command and control structures, the people aren't working together. They're waiting for and interacting only with their leader.
Yeah.
And so we also know from the data that well over 90% of the time, teams outperform individuals.
Yeah.
And in those cases, when they don't, it's because they were led poorly.
Yeah.
We're just smarter together.
Yeah.
And so you making all the decisions, me making all the decisions, any leader, I mean, I think that is awful advice.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. It's a good answer to the question.
Yeah, that's good. Well, and so many times I'll build on what you just landed there with is how many times have you called me and said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And I call you all the time. What do you think about this? And we have other people on our team that we're doing the same thing with. And I just love this idea of collaboration. You still may have to make a decision. I still may have to we've got to do it this way. But just knowing what's going on, weigh-in does lead to buy-in.
Or
And-
just smarter
and
too.
We're just smarter.
We have
I mean,
different
we're gonna-
skills,
we're
and
going to make
different
better
passions, and
decisions.
different personalities.
That's exactly
different
right.
temperament, different education.
Yeah.
And you put that together.
And it becomes magic.
That's why I'm actually a fan of teams. It's
Yeah.
not because it's fun. We talked about fun a few
Yeah.
days ago.
Yeah.
Although it can be fun,
Yeah.
is teams just produce
They just
better
outperform
results.
individuals. Yeah.
They outperform
Yeah.
individuals, which
Yeah.
is why
That's great.
it's awful advice for you to make all the
It
decisions.
is. And so here's my takeaway for you today. I'm going to go back to what you said earlier. I mean, we always like to give you something that you can do. Here's what I would tell you to do today. If you get bad advice, let that go. I mean, you don't want to pay attention to that. But here's what I would say to you. As you get advice or you get input or you read something, filter that through what really is wise. Let's go back to where I started today. The wise decision really is the best decision. Wise advice is going to take you a lot further than poor advice. If somebody tells you you're in charge, do what you want to do, that's bad advice. You gotta think through all those places people give you bad advice, things that don't work. Learn from your experiences, learn from your people, learn together, and I think you can be the leader that you were born to be. All right, remember, the best leaders lead every day.